Perfect.
Right, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Milind Tambe. I had the pleasure of meeting Milind at the IIMS India Branch Symposium just a few weeks ago and was able to bestow upon him an honorary fellowship. So congratulations, Milind, and very well deserved. For those of you who don't know, Milind was our regional director of the India branch for a number of years. He's still very active over there, although not now in that role. Milind is a very talented individual as far as not only a decent, competent surveyor, he has great fun with his digital camera and might also be found trekking in the Himalayas as well. So without further ado, Milind, I know digital photography is something of an art form as far as you're concerned, so I'm very much looking forward to having you bring us up to date with digital technology. Over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks a lot. Good day, everyone. Good day, all of y'all who are watching me right now online, and good day to all of those who would be watching a recorded version of this a little later. It's good to see 23 participants logged in right now. A warm welcome to all of you again from IIMS and IIMS India branch. The presentation this hour is how to make the best use of a digital camera and digital image asset management. When Mike asked me to present this particular topic, it was indeed a big challenge because this is a subject which I normally cover into a 3-day workshop, and I had to compress the whole content into less than 60 minutes. But well, I think I did it, Mike. So thanks for giving me this opportunity. Now, before we go on to today's topic, I would like to show you what a famous Hungarian painter and photographer Laszlo Moholy-Nagy said way back in 1923 about photography. Here it is. Knowledge of photography is just as important as that of the alphabet. The illiterate of the future will be ignorant of the use of camera and pen alike. What a foresight. Can any one of us name any one person today who would say that he doesn't know how to take a picture? Certainly not. And that brings me to my today's question to all of you. How many of us have ever been out on the field for a survey without an imaging device? You certainly carry one of these devices, right? A compact camera or a digital SLR, or even maybe a phone equipped with a decent camera, or it could be an infrared camera, it could be a drone camera, it could be a hidden camera. You name it and the list is endless. It's absolutely endless. But for the purposes of today's presentation, we will just talk about a digital compact camera and a digital SLR, because the principles and the basics of these two types of cameras more or less applies to all other imaging devices. So we are going to concentrate on these two particular types of cameras. Many of my peers and colleagues often ask me, what is the best camera for me as a surveyor? Well, there is no definitive answer, because it all depends on what kind of surveys you do. What are your needs? How do you intend to use your camera? What conditions you would be using your camera in? So it's a choice that you have to make. But I'm going to make the process a little bit easier for you by showing you the pros and cons of these two typical types of cameras, that is the digital compact and the digital SLR. Let's see the pros and cons of a digital SLR. Generally, the image quality of a DSLR, I would prefer to call this digital SLR as DSLR, which is a common acronym. The quality of images is very good due to a large sensor size. These types of cameras generally are adapted to quite a number of lenses. You can use a wide angle lens, you can use a zoom lens, you can use different lenses onto it. So you actually get a better creative control. These cameras have a large internal buffer memory, like it's like a RAM of a computer. So these cameras can take a lot of images in succession without any shutter lag or without any lag between the time you press the shutter and that the image is captured. You have an optical viewfinder, so more or less it is the VisiVic technology. What you see is what you get. So what exact view that you see in the viewfinder is what you get. There is no cropping out. Most of these DSLRs show you a 99% accurate scene into the viewfinder. It has a very large ISO range. Now, what is this ISO range? We are coming to it a little later into this presentation, but it's got a big ISO range. So these cameras are very versatile in very lighting conditions. You can use them in low light conditions. You can use them in bright light, into different artificial lights, you name it, and you can use this camera. The DSLR also has a lot of manual control. So you have a better creative control over your image making process. The depth of field is again very good with DSLR cameras as compared to the compacts. With all these goods, there certainly are some cons. It is very high priced. A good digital SLR camera is really costly. Just the body itself starts from about $700 to $800, a decent body, so it's costly. And add to that the cost of good lenses, so that becomes quite a big amount. They're quite large and cumbersome. They're heavy. I mean, my DSLR bag weighs almost about 10 kgs. Now imagine carrying 10 kgs of weight and climbing up a mast of a ship. Just impossible. So the weight is a big deterrent. It becomes awkward in some situations. DSLRs generally come with a high maintenance cost. You need to clean the lenses quite often. You need to clean the sensors quite often because the lenses come out. There are a lot of chances of dust going into your cameras and the sensors getting spots onto them. So there's a high maintenance cost associated with DSLRs. DSLRs are quite noisy because they have a lot of moving equipments and moving parts within it. So they make a lot of noise. So you can't be inobtrusive, especially in some cases when you need to be. They make a lot of noise. They're complex to operate, especially if your learning curve is not very sharp. You will often find that you buy a good piece of DSLR and the pictures don't come out too good. But now after this, probably that won't be the case. Let us see what are the pros and cons of a compact camera. The size makes it very handy. It's very compact. You can simply slip it into your shirt pocket and you can carry it wherever you want. It's very quiet in operation. Very less components that move within, so it's quite an inobtrusive. There are a lot of auto modes, but at the same time, it lacks manual modes. Though some of the advanced compact cameras do have manual modes, but majority of the compact cameras will lack a manual mode. So you have to stick to auto modes. But at the same time, these auto modes make picture taking a bit hassle-free. And that is what we are going to see in the second half of this presentation. It's reasonably priced, meaning you can afford to change your equipment if it breaks. Or you can also have a similar piece of equipment for all your colleagues, so each one is using the same product line. It has an LCD framing, unlike the DSLR where you have a viewfinder. Majority of the compact cameras do not come with a viewfinder, so you have to compulsorily view it through the LCD panel behind. This is a boon as well as a bane. A boon when you can't actually see the condition, like you have a damage inside a cabinet of a yacht and you can't really crawl in and look in. You can simply put in this camera, take a picture, come back and see and view what the damage looked like. That's a plus point. But at the same time, the LCD screens of these cameras are very small. So it becomes someone with a poor eyesight like me would try and struggle trying to focus through these small little LCD panels. But that's it. The cons, image quality is often low because the sensor size is very, very small in this camera because of the size. They have made it into a compact camera. The sensor size becomes smaller. We will again see how the sensor affects in the next slide. It has a smaller ISO range as compared to a DSLR. So the conditions in which you can take pictures is generally limited. These cameras often have a lag, what we photographers call it as a shutter lag. The moment you press the shutter button, the actual image is captured a milliseconds later. So if you want that particular moment where something is breaking or something is falling and you want to capture it, it may so happen that if you have not practiced enough with this camera, you might not capture that moment. So there is a little bit of shutter lag. As I said, the LCD size sometimes is small and can be annoying. There are limited manual controls, so there's no much of creative control with a compact camera. Though with practice, you can be equally creative as a DSLR, but it's all about practice. It is less adaptable because the entire equipment is fixed. You can't change lenses. On some cameras, you can't even add on an additional flash. So it becomes a deterrent in some particular cases. But that's for it. Now we have seen the DSLR and the compact. DSLR generally gives you a better image quality, but with a drawback of added weight and extra cost. And compact will give you a slightly lower quality of images, but the plus point is it's very compact and you can simply carry it and go anywhere. You want to climb a mast of a sloop and check the masthead fittings and take pictures, you can do that. You want to go into the bilges of a ship, crawl in and take pictures inside, you can do it. With a DSLR, that may be a little difficult. So these are the two types of cameras, and these are the pros and cons which you can analyze for yourself before you buy a camera. There are some other factors which you should consider when you buy a camera. Whenever you buy a camera, you should always see that it can capture images at least in two formats, maybe RAW and JPEG or TIFF and JPEG. Why? We will see that into the part of digital image asset management. It is very vital that your camera captures images in at least two formats. And compacts as well as DSLRs both offer these particular capabilities, especially into the higher end of the compacts, they do have this capability. Another important factor is how big is the internal buffer memory. The internal buffer memory is like a RAM of your computer. It is the memory of the camera which it uses after it has captured a scene till the time it stores onto the data card. So the bigger the buffer memory, the faster you can take the images one after the other. Otherwise, you have to wait for a few seconds before the image is captured. Another good aspect and important aspect that you should see is how big a memory card it can take. And when I say how big is not in terms of size, but in terms of GB. The largest GB of card that your camera can take, that much the better. Another two aspects that are very important is how long will the battery last in ideal conditions. Because if you have to continuously change batteries between surveys, it at times becomes annoying. Just imagine not carrying a spare battery and you're into the bilges or a double bottom tank and you have to crawl out all the way out just to simply change the battery. Annoying, isn't it? So you should have some equipment which can have a longer battery life. And remember, battery life always is dependent on the situation. If you're working in colder climates, batteries tend to drain faster. At the same time, if you're working in tropical conditions like how I work, the batteries generally last long. So whenever you're choosing a camera, see that it has adequate battery life for your work environment. Another important aspect about batteries is your camera should have a facility where the batteries can be charged outside the camera. In doing so, the advantage is once you're doing a survey, you can have other spare batteries being charged and made ready for you to change and swap over. Some of the compact cameras especially have only an in-camera charging. That becomes a deterrent because then you have to stop your survey, go back, charge your batteries, come back and continue from where you left. So these are some other aspects that you should check before you buy a camera. Megapixels. This is a big myth and we are just about going to bust that myth. This particular picture that you see is a small little component called a sensor. This lies behind the lens and behind the shutter of a digital camera. Now, what does it do? This sensor actually captures the light that is put into the camera after you press the shutter, and combined with the memory card, it acts like a film, an old-time film. So this is a particular device which actually captures your image. These days, because of the competition between various manufacturers, there has been a race to pump in more and more megapixels into the sensor. Now, you must have heard of cameras with 20 megapixels, 40 megapixels, 100 megapixels. There are cameras with 100 megapixels. But just imagine 20 million pixels, 20 million small squares in a sensor which is 1 inch by 1 inch, and 20 million small squares in a sensor which is just 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch. You can appreciate the squares in the 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch sensor are going to be much, much smaller than the pixels in the 1 inch by 1 inch sensor. So the quality of light that is captured by the 1 inch sensor is going to be far more superior than the same 20 megapixels inside a 3/4 inch sensor. So the crux here is not how many megapixels, but the size of the sensor. So when you go out to buy a camera, don't look for how many megapixels. Ask the dealer what is the size of the sensor. If the size of the sensor is big, and even if it has got a few megapixels less, it doesn't make much of a difference. Why? Well, why do we take these images? To present them as evidences, maybe in our reports or in the court of law, whatever the use is. What is the maximum size of a photograph that you print on a photo quality paper which prints at 300 pixels per inch? Maybe about 8 by 10 inches, because even if you print the photograph on a full A4 size or a letter size paper. That's normal size, 10 by 8. The figures that you see in the table there in the brackets in red, those are the commercial paper sizes. So look at the row where it says 10 into 8 and follow that row to the left. You will see the maximum megapixels required is 8. Even if your print size is going to be 18 by 12 inches, which is quite considerable, maybe as big as your PC screens, the maximum pixels that you need is 22. So for any surveying assignment, any camera which is between 8 megapixels and 24 megapixels is good enough. You don't need any more megapixels than this. What you need is a big sensor. So even if you have a big sensor, bigger size sensor, a full frame sensor of 20 megapixels, it is more than enough for your normal surveying assignments. The myth busted? Perfect. Now the final verdict. Before you shell out your money, analyze your needs. What is it that you need? What conditions are you going to take your pictures in? Research the market, what is available, and then go and buy equipment. You may buy the latest camera today, but believe me, in today's scenario, that is going to be obsolete in a matter of 6 months. It has happened with me. A camera that I purchased a few months back, they've stopped production of that camera. And this is very much in vogue these days. What you buy as latest today becomes outdated tomorrow. So it's not necessary that you always will have the best equipment. Make a wise decision. Stick to reputed manufacturers. Why I am saying this is because sticking to one brand of cameras throughout your organizations makes more sense, because then you can have interportability of equipment. The equipment that I use tomorrow, if one of my colleagues needs to use the camera, he can use it, and he won't be stumbling and fumbling trying to find the controls of the camera, because he too would be using the same manufacturer's cameras. And between the same manufacturer, they generally place the controls, the general menus in the same places in the same manner. So it's not very difficult to pick up a different piece of equipment and go out for a survey. So stick to one manufacturer, whichever you choose, and continue with its product line. Make a wise decision. Don't spend your hard-earned money on the things that are going to be obsolete tomorrow. I have not changed my cameras for the last 12 years. So nothing goes wrong if you use the same camera. Perfectly fine. Now you have made your choice, you have analyzed your needs, you have identified your camera manufacturer, you've got the camera, it's lying on your table. What next? Well, you got to master the controls of your camera. You got to know the science of making a perfect photographic exposure and learn the art of photographic composition. I would say that mastering controls of your camera is similar to acquiring a survey skill. And mastering perfect photographic exposure and learning the art of composition is like learning how to write a good report. One cannot do without the other. So it's vital that you master the controls of the camera, at the same time learn the photographic exposure science and the basics of composition. We will see what these particular things are in a short while. For the ease of presentation and for you to understand the terminology I'm going to use in the presentation, we will go and see how to master perfect exposure. What is a perfect photographic exposure? It is nothing but a science. It is a function of the aperture of the lens, the shutter speed of the camera, and the sensitivity of your sensor or film speed. Now, what is the aperture? Aperture is nothing like the iris of your eye. You have seen into a mirror sometimes, or rather you see that every day. When you look closer into the mirror, into your iris, you can see the iris dilates and it contracts. The same thing happens into a camera lens. I can try and show you something here now. See, this is a camera lens, if you all can see. Now the aperture of the camera lens is fully open. Now I close down the aperture of the camera lens. Closing down. Now that's called the aperture of the lens. Now what happens with this aperture is you actually control the quantity or the amount of light hitting the sensor. The bigger the aperture, more the light. The lesser the aperture, less the light. These apertures are often determined on cameras in standard numbers, f16, f11, f8, f5.6, f4, f2.8, and so on. And always remember, between two consecutive apertures, the amount of light halves or doubles. That means if the amount of light coming in to the camera at f11 was x, and if you change the aperture to f16, the light is half, that is it's x by 2. So you are reducing the amount of light. So what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is nothing but the function that happens behind the lens, whereby the amount of light is again controlled for a certain duration of time. And this shutter speed is often expressed in seconds or fractions of a second. So if you increase the aperture, you can reduce the shutter speed. If you increase the shutter speed, you can reduce the aperture to balance off the amount of light entering into the camera. And the third thing is ISO or sensor speed, which generally is always determined in stops of 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 32, 64, and so on and so forth. So we all have done our STCW courses, right? We know what is a fire triangle. Similarly, I like to explain exposure as an exposure triangle. It's nothing but a function of film speed coupled with aperture and shutter speed. If you increase the input of one, you can either then decrease the input of one or two combined together, and vice versa. That way you can get a perfect exposure. Now it's difficult for me to explain to you in a short while, but if anyone of you has been lucky to attend any of my workshops that I did, you will relate to what I'm saying about this. This actually is a practical exercise. Well, that's the science of photographic exposure. Now let us see what are the common camera modes and how a surveyor can use those camera modes into his day-to-day surveying activities. On your camera dials or somewhere in the menu, you will always see some figures like that, which you see on the right side of your screen. Let us see what is a landscape mode. A landscape mode is always determined by those two triangles, like two mountains, or maybe a square frame with two mountains into it. That's the landscape mode. In landscape mode, what is it that happens actually into the camera? The camera makes its settings in such a way that maximum field of view is in sharp focus. And these are good for surveyors when you want to take general views of vessels or general views of the cargo store onto a deck or into the hold. General deck layouts or where and vast expanse needs to be shown. These are the ideal modes to be used. I mean, these are more or less hassle-free modes. If you are using a compact and you want to take a picture of the deck of a large Supramax carrier, go ahead, use the landscape mode. It will make your job much more easier. Some of the examples here, as you see here, I was standing onto the bridge wing of a particular vessel, and you can see the cargo that is there onto the barge and also the cargo there onto the barge. So the entire thing is in sharp focus. No need to worry about things. Another example where, as I said, deck views. Here, the deck view of this entire tug or an OSV is now clearly visible standing onto the bow of another ship. So these are places where you can actually use your landscape mode. Don't be afraid to use these modes. These are really handy modes. A portrait mode. This is generally defined onto your menu or your dial by a figure of a lady or a child or whatever it is. I mean, it's a face that they show. You have to see how it looks onto your camera. What the camera does in this mode is it reduces the f-stop, or it increases the aperture to the maximum. In doing so, the camera actually decreases the depth of field. That means it's able to isolate the subject. If the camera is focusing on my face, the wall behind and anything that is in front of me becomes out of focus. So you are actually able to concentrate onto your subject. So these are very good when you want to isolate one particular damaged oil or a particular damaged package from a stack of cargo. It's very good. It's good to isolate. You should be careful about this mode, by the way, because in low light conditions, you may need to use a sturdy support, a monopod or a tripod to take good pictures, because this is proven to be going astray, especially in low light conditions. Another beautiful mode of the compact camera is the macro mode. It's very useful for people who do investigative surveys, especially when you do damage to machinery, when you are trying to find and photograph hairline cracks, broken strands of a crane wire or a rigging. This particular mode, which normally is depicted by a flower, comes very handy. It's very good for close-ups. Excellent for close-ups. These are some of the examples. Now this is a particular damage onto a flange of a lifting lug. This one here is the broken strands. As I said, these are all taken into a macro mode. Perfect things for surveyors when they want to capture minute and fine details. Do not hesitate again. Action mode, often depicted by a man running. Now, these are very. This particular mode is very useful when you want to capture fast-moving objects. Say, like many a times on bigger ships when we go for crane damage surveys or weather damages, and there is a weather damage because of the crane is swinging from extremes to extremes, and you want to actually capture how far the swing has gone to that extreme. Using a camera on a sports mode is very efficient, because what it does is the camera selects the fastest shutter speed and the fastest ISO and a corresponding aperture for that particular scenario, and you are able to capture that swing at the 60 perfectly frozen. So it's very good where you want to capture motion and freeze it, especially say like there are rocker arms of the engine, you want to capture one at the perfect timing, one up, one down, or one up and one halfway. It's a perfect mode to use. Again, in low light conditions, try and keep the camera as steady as you can. Perfect, is it not? A perfect depiction of how bad that wave was, captured using a sports mode. The next mode is the night mode, often depicted by a person with a light or a moon, crescent moon on the top. As the name suggests, it is good for taking night exposures. In this, the ISO of the sensor is bumped up to the maximum. The shutter speed is taken to the slowest possible, handheld, that is about 1/30th or maybe 1/50th, and the aperture open accordingly. Always use a tripod or a good solid support when you're using this particular mode, because it is highly possible that you are going to shake your hand and picture is going to be blurry. So always use a tripod when you use this particular mode. When you're using this particular mode, see that there is no light that is shining directly into the lens, because if that happens, then you're going to have a burnout. Your images are going, the highlights are going to burn out, and your image is generally going to be of bad quality. So just try and ensure there is no direct flare inside the camera. Let us see a couple of pictures. A general port view where an accident happened during the day, or sorry, during the previous night, and the same scenario captured well the next night. Perfect, isn't it? Now, for this, I didn't use any tripod. All that I did was I stuck the camera against the porthole glass and took this picture. When I'm saying that use a tripod or a support, it doesn't mean a proper tripod. You can simply brace yourself perfectly, or you can stick the camera against something and hold it perfectly and take a picture. It doesn't matter, but be aware of ship's vibrations, especially on big ships. You have a lot of vibrations which actually will get transmitted to the camera. So be careful of what you support your camera against. Perfect situations where you can use preset modes. The best mode to use is the manual mode, but it has a very steep learning curve. Many a times, many of my peers ask, you say manual mode is the best, but all our pictures come out the shabbiest in manual mode. That's because you haven't learned how to use the manual. Manual mode is totally understanding exposure triangle. You have to set the camera aperture yourself, you have to set the shutter speed yourself, you have to set the sensor speed yourself. If you are able to do that perfectly, there's nothing more creative than a manual mode. A little difficult for surveyors to get into this, because we don't have so much time to continue to be so creative onto your jobs. So it's best to stick to the preset modes and make the best use of your camera. But if you have mastered photographic exposure, use a manual mode. This was one example of manual mode where the lighting was quite dicey. I had to photograph this. Mind you, the logs behind and this lashing was quite close, and you had to use a good shallow depth of field to capture this. Lighting conditions were relatively poor, cloudy, overcast, rainy day. So the manual mode comes handy when things are a little difficult. Aperture priority, a very, very, very versatile mode. In aperture priority, what you can do is I showed you the aperture into the lens. You can actually control the apertures as to how big or how small you want, and control the depth of field. The moment you control depth of field, you are able to isolate your subject from its background or foreground. That makes a picture much more interesting, because you lead the viewer's eye directly to the subject and not anywhere else. So it's a very creative use. I mean, you can see on the screen what all modes it can be used for. Some examples here. Look at this picture of a container carrier. Everything from the foreground cell guides till the bridge behind is all in sharp focus, using a deeper depth of field. So you can actually do a good thing using aperture priority modes. You can similarly show a shallow depth of field as well. Many of these modes have overlapping features. You just got to understand at what time you got to use which mode, and that overlapping feature. So once you understand this, and this all comes by practice, once you understand this, it's very easy to handle all these digital cameras. It's not a big deal. Then comes the shutter priority mode. It's the same like your sports mode. Here you can set your shutter speed to the required duration. But unlike the sports mode, here you can show motion. If you want to show the swing of the crane, as I said, where you froze it, at the same time, if you want to show the swing, you can use a slow shutter speed and show the swing of the crane here. exactly opposite to what the action mode was doing, but again controlling shutter. Program mode, it's a layman's mode. It's a dumb, for me, it's a dumb man's mode, because it takes an average exposure for an average lighting conditions for an average person. And we as good for surveyors are not average surveyors, we are good surveyors. So I wouldn't use a program mode ever. But still, if you want sure shot, like for example, someone is doing a survey and climbing a mast of a sloop onto a bosun's chair, and he wants to take a quick picture of how the boat looks from top. Instead of fumbling anywhere, simply go onto the program mode, take a shot, perfect. It's an average picture, fair enough. But if you want to do something good, it's not that good. I wouldn't recommend that. There are other controls that do matter. White balance. What is white balance? We all know that the light at different times of the day has different color temperatures. Different light sources have different light temperatures. What happens is, with these different light temperatures, which are measured in degrees Kelvin, there is a particular cast that comes onto your images, which sometimes may not be good. You must have often seen that when you take pictures of a person under a fluorescent light, you get a greenish cast, right? That is because the white balance is not set. The white balance probably is for daylight, and is taking pictures in fluorescent light. So especially when you're doing investigative surveys and where depicting accurate colors is of importance, adjusting your white balance is equally important. And all cameras have this white balance setting. You need to find out where this white balance setting is and see what options are available. Generally, you will have a daylight, cloudy, shade, fluorescent, tungsten, flash. These are the common modes of white balance, and you should use the right white balance setting for the right ambient lighting conditions. Like this room is now lit with a fluorescent light. If I take an image of myself with the camera white balance set to daylight, it's going to give a green cast. If I take the same picture using the camera white balance set to tungsten lights, it is going to give me a bluish cast. You see, so because the color temperature is different, you got to tell the camera what is the color temperature of the ambient light. A little complex, but with practice, it's very easy. So this table gives you the color temperatures for various. We do not have to go in detail, but it gives you the color temperatures for different lighting scenarios. Now let's see what happens actually when you don't set the correct white balance. Now look at this Babbitt bearing. This was heat damaged. Less of lubricant, whatever the cause was, it was heat damage. It was heated at a particular spot. Now the lighting, this was taken into the engine control room of a bulk carrier. The lighting conditions were fluorescent light. The white balance was set to fluorescent. Now you can see here the whites are white, the blacks are black, and all the colors in between. Now, this is a small image. You may not be able to see it properly, but if you see it full screen, it's good enough. You can actually see the different use of blue in that heat affected area on the top of that Babbitt bearing. For illustration purposes, for purposes of this presentation and workshops like this, I deliberately took the same subject under different lighting, in different white balance conditions. But this was for the correct white balance. Now I took this same picture under fluorescent light for a white balance set to daylight. See, it's given me a green cast. Now it's not showing me the accurate colors of the heat damaged areas. It's adding a green cast to it. So when I actually want to see what is the color of that heat damaged area, I'm not getting an accurate representation. So it's no good. As a surveyor, it's no good in the court of law. If I have to prove, give this as evidence, it's no good because the expert can't see what colors the metal has turned to. Similarly, this is taken using the tungsten. This is with a cloudy white balance. So similarly, white balance is very, very important. The second most important thing for you to understand for your camera is metering modes. Every camera will have a metering mode, because when in the program mode or the aperture priority mode, it evaluates the light. It evaluates the light in a particular manner. If you go into the menu of your cameras, depending on the manufacturer, you will find several of these symbols. Now the top row of all the symbols shows an evaluative metering. What does the camera do in evaluative metering? Your entire viewfinder, it divides it into small sections, and it takes a major reading for the center and balances the luminosity levels that are seen into the balance areas of the picture, and takes an average to give you an average exposure. That's in matrix metering or in zone metering or an average metering. Different camera manufacturers call it differently, but that's a zone metering or a matrix metering. The second one is often shown with brackets and a spot in between. That is a spot-centric metering. or center heavy or center spot heavy metering. So in doing so, what it does is the camera evaluates the lighting intensity in the center part of the frame and adjusts the exposure accordingly. And the third is a spot metering, where it's similar to the center weighted spot metering, but it narrows down the area of metering to a much smaller part of it, just say about 5% to 6% of the overall viewfinder size. Now, what is the importance of this? Assume that the wall behind me was very white and bright. I'm wearing a blue shirt. The camera is trying to take a picture of me. Now, what is happening? And if I do it in matrix mode, what is going to happen? The white surrounding wall, which is more of an area than what I occupy in the frame, the camera meter is going to be fooled by that white, and it is going to make the picture less brighter compared to compensate for that white. In turn, it is going to make me look black or dark. That's not what is intended. The subject is me. So if you want to take a picture of me in that particular conditions, because I have worn a dark color t-shirt, it would be ideal if you go to the center weighted or center spot mode. So in that case, when you point the camera to me, the area covered is just this. The camera just measures this, the light intensity on my face, and makes a perfect exposure. And that is what we want to show in the picture, right? Similarly, if you have, for example, say there is a fire on board a ship or fire on board the boat, it's a very tricky situation. In such scenarios where there are isolated patches of bright and dark, and depending on what you want to depict in the picture, you should use the spot meter. You can then direct the spot onto the particular area which you want perfectly exposed. Press your shutter halfway down. That needs a little bit of practice. Practice that. It's a feature where you can lock your exposure and your focus, and then come back, frame the image, and click it. It's very tricky. Many people don't get it right, but with practice, it's very important. And always remember, your metering follows your focus, and your focus follows your metering. So that means wherever you focus, that is the point that the camera is going to consider to be metered. So if you're focusing on me now, and with this all being white, it's going to get fooled. But if you use the center weighted or the spot and just direct the spot in the viewfinder onto my face or onto my body, it's going to make a perfect exposure. So, and it's going to be focusing onto me as well. So remember this, your focus and exposure follow each other. The next important thing to understand and know is the ISO or sensor speed. Find out in your cameras where can you set this ISO or sensor speed. This is very vital. If you are going into low light areas inside the boat or inside the ship where the lighting conditions are not as bright as daylight, it makes sense to bump up the sensor speed. From 100 is normal. From 100 you can go up to, depending on how dark or bright the condition is, you can bump up your shutter speed to up to 400 or 800. Anything beyond 800 will give you a grainy image. So up to 800 you can bump it up. But it depends. You need to understand what the intensity of lighting is, and accordingly raise up your ISO speed. That will give you much more control over what apertures and shutter speeds you can use. This is, again, we are coming back to that exposure triangle. So ISO and sensor speed. So, I was talking about going into low light areas. Now this was taken into an engine room where it was not too well lighted. I had to take this at ISO 1600. If I make a 8x10 print, you can actually see that the print is a bit mottled. It's a bit grainy, and that's the vice of going to higher ISO speeds. But that is how it is. Okay, now composition and aesthetics, they do matter. Understand the rules of composition. I'm going to rush through this because it's a very long topic and I do not want to bore you all. Learn the rules of composition. There are several rules of composition. The most basic being the rule of thirds. What is rule of thirds? Imagine your viewfinder, split it into 3 vertical parts and 3 horizontal parts. The areas where they meet, the lines meet, the cardinal points which are shown here in red, those are the ideal spots where you can have your image placed, or sorry, your subject placed. Once you have the subjects in one of these cardinal points, your picture for sure is going to be a little impactful than if you had not done this. Let's look at an example. Look at this. Well, you can't place objects into a survey, but you can certainly move yourself, right? You can move yourself around and frame it in such a way. Now look at the cardinal points. The bottom of the tug and the top of the tug are at the 2 cardinal points on the right. The backhoe there is at the left cardinal point at the left bottom. So they are at the cardinal points. Had this not been taken this way, it would not have been as impressive as it looks here. Learn about leading lights. Okay, before going to leading lights, balance your photograph. Many a times what you do is we just take one object and leave the balance remaining of the frame empty. It's generally bad aesthetics. Always balance it with something else of lesser importance. That way you give more prominence to your actual subject. Here the water injection dredger here at the front and those two tugs at the back. The two tugs are actually balancing the frame. Otherwise the frame would have been lopsided. Look out for leading lines. In marine fields, there are lots of leading lines. An ideal example here. You want to take a picture of a ship, instead of just taking a picture right from the bang on from the bow or bang on from the side, use leading lines. Here the mooring lines are creating a leading line, leading your eye from that bollard right to the ship and towards the back of the ship. It's a very important thing. That way, you are actually directing the viewer's eye to where it should go. Similarly, here, the leading lines, the two leading lines, the Mediterranean moor, these mooring lines, these are acting as leading lines to the ship, the daughter ship that is moved there. Look out for backgrounds. A very poor example, photograph, a good example of what a background should not be. So much of clutter in the background. Now, where should I look? Towards the newspaper at the back or the Babbitt bearings in the front? Had this been taken onto a clean, plain background, it would have been much more effective. So look out for backgrounds when you take pictures. Make use of existing frames to add depth. This is a single point mooring which I have taken from a tanker. I could have very well gone above the bulwark and taken the picture of the single point mooring buoy. But just taking the picture from the bulwark, the Panama hole, it gives me a frame. Now again, here I have coupled two composition elements, the framing as well as the leading line. The mooring line is leading to the SPM, so it's directly leading your eye to the SPM. So use existing frames that are there. Another use of frames. I mean, I had to take a picture of the crane using a lifting a coil. The hatch combings provided a perfect frame. So look out for such small things. They will improve your photographs. Add scale. That is very important, especially when you're photographing large things. Now, this was a huge transformer, almost about 18 to 22 feet in height. I don't exactly remember. But now in this particular image, I have to tell you what the height and breadth of this transformer was. But just after I took this image, there was a crew member who walked past and I took this image. Now I don't need to tell you the scale, right? You can for yourself make out how big that transformer is. So add scale to your image. Whenever, and this is not only for big things, also for small things. There may be chips into lubricating oil or some particles in lubricating oil. You want to show those particles, just simply put a scale down below. You add an actual scale and you can now see how big or small these particles are. Add scale to your images. That makes more sense. This brings us to the second half of our presentation, which is digital image asset management. What is an asset? Let me read out something for you as to what an asset is. An asset is anything of value or a resource of value that can be converted into cash. Individuals, companies, and governments own assets. For a company, an asset might generate revenue, or the company might benefit in some way from owning or using this asset. Now tell me, do you not really earn out of your digital images? You certainly do, right? In many ways. You get fees for your surveys and survey reports because you include reports. You put images as evidences of what you have seen. So images actually earn you revenue. So why not manage them? You manage all your other assets. Why not the images? So what is the life cycle of managing your digital image assets? It's basically create, manage, distribute, and preserve. You have already created the asset onto the field. Now, once you come back to the office, you need to manage it because you need to find that particular image at a later date. You got to know what that image depicted. So you got to put in certain keywords, certain details into the image which you did not or you could not at the time of capturing that image. That is done in the office. There is something called ITPC codes. I'm not going to elaborate on that because that's a huge subject in itself and almost a couple of hours long of talk onto that. But right click onto your image, you'll see in properties, go in the properties, go to the details, you'll find keywords and ITPC details. You can add a lot of keywords there as to what is this about, when was it taken, what does it refer to, and you're free to add whatever keywords you want to add. Adding that keywords makes it rich, even richer. Manage that. Then once you have managed this, once you have identified, put them into the right folders after your survey, you need to distribute them, right? Because someone has to get a right to typeset your reports. Someone has to pick up that photograph from that folder, put it there. Maybe you have a web designer who needs certain images, or maybe you are very active, like some of us are, onto social media, and you need to put out images. But you need to put out images after a certain day of the survey, or after a certain date that the survey has elapsed for confidentiality reasons. So you have to define a timeline and who uses those images when. So that is the distribution part of it. So you have to actually allocate certain rights to certain people as to when they can use it and when they can't use it. And the next thing is preserving the images. You have all created an asset. Now we need to preserve that asset, because if you don't back it up and if it's lost, what do? Tomorrow, God forbid, there could be some incidents of theft into my office, and I lose all my data. The PCs are taken. I don't have backups. What do I do? So this is very important into the digital image asset management, or for that matter, in any digital asset management. And there are several commercial tools available today for digital asset management. Depending on your company's or your individual needs, you've got to choose one of those. It could be cloud-based, or it could be a local server-based. Whatever you choose what actually suits your needs. But I'm going to share with you the 7 golden secrets of digital asset management, which I have been using for the last almost 12 years, and it has never failed me. And I'm going to share those with you. What is rule number 1? Is shield your data. It is very important. Your digital image data is like the negatives of the olden days. Now here is where those 2 formats. Remember, I told you, choose a camera which can save images at least in 2 formats. This is where it comes handy. Always remember, whenever you work onto JPEG files, which are the normal formats that the cameras save in, every time you work onto it, you are actually degrading the quality of that JPEG image little by little by little by little. So imagine someone has used that image for 4 different things, and the image is lying still there. The quality of that has deteriorated that many times. But at the same time, if your image was captured in RAW format, the quality would never change, because you pick up that RAW file, put it somewhere else, and just work onto the JPEG. So your original copy is always intact as you took it on the scene. So shield your data. Have it in 2 formats, one separate and the other one separate. The one which is an archival kind of a format, don't use it. Use just the JPEGs. Safeguard your data. Remember the 3-2-1 rule. Whenever you download images from your memory card, never cut paste them. Always copy paste them. You should have at least 3 copies of your images at any given time. Out of those 3 copies, 2 copies should be on separate media, and 1 copy should be offsite. Remember the 3-2-1 rule. Always 3 copies of your images, 2 on different media on site, 1 offsite. If you follow this, no matter what happens to your data, you are never going to lose your data, because you will have a safeguarded data somewhere else. So always safeguard your data. Backup supporting documents. Many a times in countries like India, especially where you need to take permissions to take pictures in the port, it is very vital that I back up all those associated documents of permissions, etc., along with my photographs. Because sometimes if I have to present these documents into the court of law, and they ask me, did you take permissions before taking these pictures? And I say, oh no, I forgot to back up that permission letter. They may say I took the pictures illegally because I'm not supposed to photograph inside Indian ports. It is so. So what do you do? All data, all paperwork that is associated with your images, please back it up with your image folders. That is very, very important. Back up your supporting documents. Your backups and archives are different. Your archive is not a backup, but your archive can have a backup. Understand the difference between the two. Backup is backup of your existing working files. In archive, you archive something when the file is closed. Finally, you no more are using this, and then that whole file, as you created, as you presented, is archived and stored separately. Now you may take a backup of this archive, but then this backup of the digital image data is still a backup. That doesn't go into the archive. Backup is separate, archive is separate. So don't confuse between archives and backups. Keep the 2 separate. Check and update data. See, in today's scenario, the softwares keep changing quite often. So a format that you are using today to access your photographs the same software, when it is updated with a different patch, may not open the old files. So it always makes sense to frequently go back to your data, see that the older files are being opened using the current version of your software. It's just because the files are seen is not necessary that the files can open. So always check and update your data. See what it needs to be done to update your data, right? Build a routine and stick to it, because there is nothing like routinization. If you do the same thing over and over and over again, it becomes a habit, and then you never tend to go wrong. So build a routine. Build a routine how you are going to back up your data. I mean, right from copying your data to backing up your data to archiving your files. Stick to a routine. Once you have stuck to it, make it known. Because it's no good if you keep it to yourself, right? You got to make others in your organization known about that routine. So document it. In fact, I have a proper procedural document as to how to download images, how to distribute images, how to add the IDPC tags, and how to archive. Once that is known, even if I'm not there in office, anyone picking up that file, reading through the guidelines, knows how he's going to do it. So make it known, document it. Once you have done this, you just can't go wrong. These 7 rules have not put me down for the last 12 years, and I'm sure they're not going to put you down ever. So that's about digital image asset management. Well, there are several more resources that you can refer. IMS actually publishes a book on what a marine surveyor needs to know about digital imaging. It's both available in soft copy as well as ebook. There is another presentation which you can refer to, which is preserving evidentiary value of digital images. It's on the IMS YouTube channel. Do refer these two references. You will learn a lot more about this. Any questions you can, I know it's just 4-5 minutes for me to finish, but if there are any questions, do mail me at milindtambe@gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And Mike, over to you again. Thank you. I hope I kept your time frame of 60 minutes.
Milind, you're spot on. I was just about to come online and say to you your 5-minute warning bell. So well done. You kept the time perfectly. And what a brilliant presentation. And yet again, you've shown everybody that you have more than a passing knowledge in digital photography. And it's a medium that I share with you. I love digital photography, but I know how challenging it can be. And it's a wonderful tool for us there. We've got an online comment coming in from Justice to Milind saying thank you very much for that. Does anybody else, we've got a couple of minutes, anybody else like to ask a question of Milind whilst we have him live? Any questions for Milind?
Yeah, Milind, this is Dan Robsham from the United States. Thank you very much for the presentation. I learned quite a bit. It is fantastic, well presented, and the topic is very important for marine surveyors. In our practice of 10 men, busy every day, one of our challenges is the processing of photos once taken and returned to the office in order to get them into a report. Do you have any good suggestions for that part? Because that actually takes up quite a bit of time.
Yes, Dave. As far as processing of photos is concerned, it's a huge thing. You could process them into an image processor, or you could just process them whilst you're sort of typesetting a Word document. As far as I am concerned, I generally do not post-process my images as far as survey images is concerned into any post-processing program, because by doing that, what happens is you are actually changing the original JPEG file from what the raw file is. And many a times, I do quite a lot of work where the evidence goes in the court. And in courts, they really don't understand. They say your original looked like this and your final is looking like this. They don't accept it. So I generally do not post-process it. I just keep it as it is. At the most, what post-processing I would do is into the word processor, I might just adjust the contrast or the brightness or probably crop it a bit. That's all. I would not recommend doing any post-processing, especially onto your survey-related photographs. And that is the reason why taking a perfect exposure in camera becomes as much more important.
Well, thank you very much. It certainly is useful to know. Of course, when we do our legal work, of course, we do understand not to process the photographs, or at least to be able to submit into evidence the unprocessed photograph. For reporting, a lot of times a client does not actually require an evidentiary quality photograph, but what happens is the photograph sizes get so unwieldy into the digital format that the actual word processing program slows down or any of that. Have you any good techniques for managing that for non-evidentiary type photographs?
Yes, Dave.
Last answer, please, Milind. Last answer, please. Thank you.
Yes, Dave, there are commercially available image downsizers which you can use. You can simply put in a batch of images and select the size that you want, maybe 1080 pixels or 860 pixels, and then downsize the image, where generally the image size is compressed in such a way that you can mail them over emails or put them into your reports. It doesn't make much of a difference. That certainly, yes, you can do as far as it comes to downsizing the images. Or you could use proprietary image softwares like Adobe or Lightroom, and then they have a feature where you can downsize the image for sort of putting it onto the internet or something, so that makes the image size to a few kbs. That certainly can be done, but then you should not change the originals. You should always downsize or resize and save them as a separate copy and keep the originals intact should the need be.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'll get in touch by email. Thank you, Milind.
And Dan, thank you very much for your question. Much appreciated. Milind, it's been wonderful to spend time in your company, as it always is. I thank you very much indeed. And thank you for giving us something of what was a masterclass in digital photography. Much appreciated, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.